Hi everyone and welcome to a new quick tip. Today we'll be looking at how to create this scene that I've created for the project with ZbyHP. This is one video, but we're going to be talking into three different parts. The first one is the deformation of the rock. The second one is how I put all the, let's call it greenery, to come up. And the third one is the particles that explode as well as the transformation happens. So to get started, you need to get an asset. In this case, I used this Thai beach rock from Megascans. So once you download it and export it into your scene 4D, we can start going. I already have the scene set up here. So it's just the assets that you get from Megascans, and I just have a plane with a background for it. The only difference here that I've done is, let me actually turn this on so we can see, is usually it will come like this. So it's a bit more saturated and things like that. And I just tone it down. So I really just changed mainly the saturation level and then just play a bit with the gamma and contrast. But you can keep it as you prefer. This obviously was later on as I was lighting it and adding all the elements that I decided to do this. But for the purpose of the quick tip, we can just start it like this. So the first thing we're going to do is create then the deformation, deformation thing happening to the rock. So with the rock selected, and on this view mode, we'll go to select, set vertex weight, and we'll keep it as default. So you see it's changed it to red, sorry. And then once we go here to our vertex map, we're going to actually click here on use fields, and automatically creates a freeze. If we play, nothing happens. So let's go and add a spherical field. You see that it's already changing. What we'll do is I'll start by making this smaller. And I'm actually going to keyframe. So I'm going to start it a bit from outside. And just a few frames in, it's going to hit the surface. But as we play again, it's nothing too fancy. And that's because we need to go to freeze, and on the mode, we'll do grow. If we click again, you see it just grows slightly, but to improve that, we'll just need to crank up the radius. So let's try 20. Okay, it's doing more, we're still having some parts that's not covered, so let's go up to 30. Okay, you can also change the effect strength. So you can play with the size of your spherical field and then radius and strength of the growth. So now it's doing quite interesting, but I didn't want the whole rock to transform, just parts of it. So let's add an extra field. Let's do a shader and let's do a noise. So let's go in here. We already see what's affecting. So I'll start by changing the noise mode to electric. And let's crank this up to probably 5. Okay, that's looking good. And now I just really want to crank these values. So we actually just, instead of having these, let's call it gray values, I just want to have more whites and blacks. So let's start cranking here how much this affects. So you can play with the settings here as well. I'm just going to do 4 into 5. And if we play it, it's not really what we want. So what we have to do is actually change the blending mode. So I'll do subtract. And here we go. You can play with all of these settings. I'll keep it as I had. And we already have now what we'll call, let's say, our mask to the effect. So let's start by adding a subdivision. And I'm going to group this, call it rock. And inside here, I want to do a displacer. And I want this displacer to only affect where this vertex map is, so the mask that we did. For us to see it, let me just go and put a color. And let's crank this up. Right, so you see it's now just affecting the parts that we have. So, and because it's, let's say, an animated mask, you see it's growing as he hits. We can also come here and smooth it. So let's add this there. And instead of, obviously now we have this full on color here, let's actually go into a noise and let's go inside it. Let's go again to the same, so electric. Let's change the octave, so let's simplify this and put 1. Let's crank this probably to 500. Here we go, starting to get something more interesting. And I think I'll keep the low and high clips the same as it is. There we go, drag that there. Okay. You can also, if you want, play with the settings of the strength of this splicer. You can keyframe it as well. I'm just gonna keep it as is for now, as it's working quite fine. So on the actual scene that I created for the project, I used X particles to kind of create the feeling of cloth. So when the vertex map was acting, it was also making it cloth, make it like more organic. But for the purpose of this quick tip, another way that we can do so is here on the displacer, on the Falloff, we can go here and add a delay. Let's add it spring, and maybe let's try 20. So let's see. So you see now it kind of bounces back to that shape. You can play around, or you can even have cloth it if you want, but for the purpose of this tutorial, this will suffice. So now that we're happy with this base control, let's go into my next scene. As you can see here, it's just what we've done before. Just have everything's organized. And the main thing I wanted to do when I was creating the scene is that the parts that extrude out from the rock will become this kind of glass water material. So let's create that. Let's do create redshift material. Let's apply that to our rock. See it here, okay. Now if we go in, I'm gonna go and just use the water preset. If you're on the newest redshift, you won't have these presets, but you can just adjust the settings to pretty much what we have here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and just change the dispersion to maybe 1.4. I'm gonna actually remove this and just maybe put some roughness in it. So this is the material, but obviously it's only affecting everything, and I only wanted to affect some of the parts. Similar to what we did with this displacer, we're gonna use the same vertex map as our mask. So let's search for the vertex map. Let's drag and drop, and then let's do a material blend. So we'll blend the material we got from Megascans, the rock, with this new material. So we can just go here and drag and drop. So this would be our base material, because at the beginning, when it's still in its form, we want it to be the rock. And this water one would be layer 1. And we use this vertex map, plug it in here, as our blend color. So if we see it now, there we go. Now this is affecting a lot, so I'm actually going to use a ramp in between our vertex map and our layer. Oops, sorry, no one. And our blend color. And I'm just going to adjust this slider. Maybe here. Okay. So obviously this is not as interesting because there's no proper lighting. But if we go into our new scene here, I've already adjusted here the lighting. I just have a physical sun, and then I have a dome light here with a symmetrical garden. So if I remove this, nothing fancy. I've also adjusted the position of the rock, and in this case I've actually, for this material, went back to what I had in terms of the animation. So I just alembic it, so we're seeing here, so we don't have to wait for the simulation. Like I said, we start with the rock, and then as we go through, it just pops out and we get this. So once we had this, now we're coming to the second part, which is adding the greenery. Just showing here that I have here a connect. This is because I have the displacer and smoothing happening. So I wanted the cloner to see everything as one, so I just put a connect. So we're gonna start by adding a cloner. And now this is where you import all your models that you wanna clone. I use some from Megascan, so I'm just have them here prepared. So now I'm just gonna copy them here into our cloner. We're then gonna change this to object mode. You can also use matrix, but this wasn't a lot of objects, so this worked fine. So I'm gonna just add our rock animation into it. We already see a few blend scatter, so we'll keep this instead of iterate, we'll put random. We'll keep it at surface, and we've got instead of 20, which is too little, let's do 200. Now we already have obviously the materials from Redshift. All right. So now they're a bit too uniform. So with the cloner selected, let's go to MoGraph Effector. Let's use a random. I can see that the position is changing. We don't want to change the position. I really just want to change the scale. So let's do uniform absolute, and let's do like -0.5. And let's also change slightly the rotation. So maybe. And what I want to do is actually, instead of using again the vertex map to make them animate, I actually just decided to use a planing factor. So let's do plane, scale to the same, uniform absolute. Let's put -1. And we'll go to our Falloff linear field, and let's change this to. Okay, so here we can see that as we push this up, they grow. So now we just need to keyframe this to roughly happen at the same time as the effect. So I'll do. Now I wanted to add some extra elements. Obviously now the greenery is covering a little bit of the glass or watery material, so I decided to just create some sphere. Oh, let's like probably 18, but let's bump up our settings to maybe segmentary 2. Let's again do a cloner, clone them into our objects. So rock animation. Let's put maybe 70 of them. So I'm also gonna do similar to before. I'm just gonna add a random effector. Change the scale on this one, 0.45. Just have them a bit to different scales. And let's also use then our planing factor. So as it moves, it brings them as well. And again, they're having this movement with the geometry. So this is really how I just created a very simple setup. And then I just added a water material. So let's do this into the cloner. Let's change it to water. Change a bit to dispersion. And you can play a bit with if you want the roughness or not. So for now, let's just keep it as is. Okay, so part 2 is done. So let's go into part 3, the final one. So here's the scene that we have from before. And what we're gonna do is create the particles. So let's start by going to X particles, system. Let's change our emitter from rectangle to object. Let's drag again the classic rock animation. Let's change our emitter from center to area. And let's go into our emission. And instead of rate, I just actually wanted to just do one shot, like to shot it out. And that's how we're going to control it. So here is when it starts. In my animation, I had it at 24. I want the direction to be 1, and I want to crank up a lot the shot count. So let's add 2 zeros more. Speed, you can play with this. I'm gonna probably do 250 and maybe 150 variation, again, just to make it not so linear. Radius test to the same, let's vary it. And let's also go here and use rotation and set this to random. And now if we just back here and play. Right, so we have our particles exploding out, but I want them to start slowing down. So with that, we go to modifiers, motion, speed. Instead of incremental, let's do acceleration and mode independent. But instead of keeping 5, we can do negative values. So let's do -45. And if we play now, emitter display to circles. So you see they start to slow down. So this is the effect we want. And then I want them to as well start scaling as they go to the outer edge. To do that, we'll go here and this one, scale. We'll do this with set by, there we go, by Falloff. I don't need to clamp, and we just go to the Falloff and we'll do a spherical field. Let's crank this size to maybe 50. And that's this, because I already know this how it's going to be. So now, if we preview with this new effect, and we see it's starting to get smaller as it passes through this Falloff, so that's great. So now let's go to our emitter and do a redshift tag object. And I'm just going to add a few cylinders, obviously put them quite small, so let's do 2 radius and maybe 0.2, and let's go caps and keep it on this. And let's duplicate this a few times and drag them here. Custom. Now if we play. Alright, so obviously they're too big. Let me change this first to random because I'm going to add different materials. And let's do this to probably 0.1. Okay, that's much better. And so now they're just a classic redshift material. So let's create some glitter material. Let's do silver. Let's do gold. Let's do another one that is copper. And the last one can maybe be green. Let's type green. Right, so silver, as you guess, custom silver can be our first one. Gold, second one. Copper, and then our last one, the green, we'll just actually do gold and change our values ever so slightly. Okay, and let's add her here. And then the only thing here that is worth sharing is that I have a redshift tag on the camera with the bokeh enabled, so it creates this bokeh effect on them. And this is the how I got to that shot. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this quick tip, and love to check what you do. Thank you very much.